Good evening. My name is Bob Chesek. I am the president of Chespin Corporation, and I work with people who are trying to incorporate businesses, start LLCs. I've been working with this industry for 19 years. Tonight I'm going to be talking about LLCs in real estate structures, as well as the mysteries around the Series LLCs that Delaware offers. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you'll learn a lot. Please reach out to me directly if you have any questions. My email is bob@chespin.com. That is spelled C-H-E-S as in Sam, S as in Sam, P-I-N.com. Thank you. About the ins and outs of what all of you have to go through, setting up LLCs, getting them properly structured for real estate ventures, so that you can get the funding. And I really thank Joe for that, because that has allowed me to create products and presentations, streamline more for you guys. So with that in mind, I do have to give you a legal disclaimer. I am not an attorney and I'm not an accountant, so I can't give you any legal or tax advice tonight. I ask that you please do not excuse me, got the hiccups. I ask that you please do not act on anything you hear tonight, especially regarding Series LLCs, unless you've talked to an attorney or an accountant first. There are many ways this can go wrong, and that should not say March 9th, 2001 or 2021. I forgot to change the date. So, are there any questions about me, background, credentials, anything like that before I proceed? Okay. So I gave you a little bit about my background already. We'll just skip over that slide. Before we even dive into anything tonight, I want to make sure everyone is aware of this topic, especially if you own a company, and especially if it's in Pennsylvania. I don't know, has anyone heard about the Corporate Transparency Act that was recently passed by Congress? The Corporate Transparency Act, in short, is a new federal law that was passed on January 1st, 2021, overriding President Trump's veto. It was attached to the National Defense Authorization Act. It will be taking full effect by January 1st, 2022. Now, new entities, or LLCs, corporations, any of the like, must register their business with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, also known as FinCEN. That's an arm of the United States Treasury, and you have to list the beneficial ownership information of who owns the LLC and who's actually getting the financial benefits. This was written specifically in mind to eliminate shell companies and to expose real estate holding companies and who actually is in control of the real estate. That is the purpose of the law. This is coming into effect very quickly. If I could ask you a whole question so I finish this part, because I think I know what you're going to ask, and I think I'm about to answer it. Now, if you're an existing company, you're going to have a 2-year catch-up period from the day the registration opens. That will be no later than January 1st, 2024. Entities that are fully closed prior to the passage of the law may not have to register. Think back to social studies, habeas corpus. The law did not exist at the time you closed the business. Exceptions do exist for companies that would have to be registered with other federal agencies, such as the SEC, publicly traded companies, banks, etc. There's going to be a whole list of exemptions. I can pretty much, I don't need to be a lawyer to tell you, I don't think anyone in this room is going to qualify for that unless you have a very special circumstance with your business. Now, here comes the fun part. Failure to comply may result in $500 daily penalties and criminal penalties of up to $10,000 plus 2 years in jail per violation. Thank you, Congress. Now, the next question I'm sure you were going to ask me is, what do I have to do for this? The answer is, I don't know. No one does. Why? Because the Treasury Department hasn't released the final rules of how you're going to register yet, and the deadline's coming up.
Wow, that's great.
But less than 3 months, you have to do this. You first, and then him.
So if you started a company a year ago, it says new entities. So, like if I create a new LLC past January 1, or is that like
any existing and operating LLC, period, regardless of the creation date, if it's active and you are using it and it was not closed prior to January 1st, 2021, then yes, you are required to register. Next question.
Is this one of those pieces of legislation where they had to pass it before they could read it and know what was in it? Like Obamacare?
Thank you, Congressman.
No,
That's all I'm going to say.
Just from what you said, like the Treasury Department hasn't even released.
This has been in debate for years.
Comply with it.
This has been in debate for years, I will tell you that.
Passed it in the law with no firm plan.
Let's put it this way, my policy is politics, or policy, not politics, so I really don't want to get into the nuance of how it got passed, but I would say if you have an objection to it, write your congressman, because they're the ones who passed it. Unfortunately, I just have to comply with whatever it is. But I don't know to what extent whether or not they actually read the law. Question?
So, understanding you're not an attorney, this would seem superficially to remove all of the various privacy protections of states like Nevada, Wyoming.
Almost. It's not going to be a publicly searchable database, but law enforcement agency, courts will be able to access it, banks will be able to access it, but it's not going to be something where you can go online and search the database. However, individual state agencies you do register with would still be a consideration for that.
Okay, thank you. Good answer.
Okay, so I do not, like I said, I don't have more information for you on this tonight. This is something I've been calling all of my old clients going back up to 7 years, warning them this is coming, trying to find out if they're even still in business. Now, why am I saying especially in Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania does not have an automatic shutdown of LLCs. If you don't actually go through the prolonged and agonizing process of fully terminating an LLC in Pennsylvania, it is still active. I just spoke to one of my old clients last night who formed 6 companies with me. He thought his accountant, by filing the final tax returns, had shut the companies down. No, all 6 of them going back to 2011 are active and will need to be shut down properly. So if you've had LLCs that you're no longer using and you haven't gone through that process, or you aren't sure if they're terminated, give me a buzz. I'll look it up. I will look it up for anyone to find out, and then you can make a decision how you want to proceed on it, if you want to proceed. Like I said, remember, the law was passed January 1st, 2021, so at least as theoretically, if your company ceased operations prior to that date, you likely do not have to register, but again, those rules are not final. Will the IRS, or will FinCEN say, well, you never closed it with Pennsylvania, so you need to register? The answer is we don't know. We won't know until they start sending out those notices. Also, one other thing, and this is important. In Pennsylvania, most people do not use a registered agent. When you filed an LLC, you probably used your home address, your business address on your paperwork. A lot of people never update that if they move. If you aren't sure what address is on your paperwork currently, again, call me. I will tell you if it needs to be updated, we can do that. I'm not going to do a sales pitch yet, but because I want to get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. But I wanted to do this right off the top of the bat to make sure everyone knows this is coming in weeks. Are there any other questions before I fall over? Okay. Now that I've scared the hell out of all of you, let's talk about LLCs. Who in the room actually owns an LLC right now? Okay. So about half of you. Now, just another question. Does anyone in the room not live or work in Pennsylvania? What state are you in?
Virginia.
Okay. I will tell you right now, I'm not going to be talking about anything Virginia tonight. But I have done Virginia LLCs before. So Virginia actually has a really easy process to make LLCs. And did you say you own one already?
I did. I don't anymore.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so an LLC is what's called a legal entity. You are basically creating a paper person. It's separate from yourself. Similar to, but not identical to, a corporation. With an LLC, the LLC can enter contracts on its own, has limited liability as long as you maintain it properly, can open its own bank accounts, take out loans, own property, do business, all the above. For those of you who own it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I've heard it referred to as a diet corporation, but I don't think that's really a good way to put it. Legally speaking, they are completely different types of structures. An LLC is essentially a more formalized partnership, whereas a corporation is a completely separate legal entity. Now, when you're talking about LLCs for real estate, they tend to be very useful tools because with real estate LLCs, you have the ability to pass through the taxes to the individual owners of the LLC as if you didn't even have an LLC to begin with, but still get the legal protection of operating with an LLC. Now, I did hear going around the room, someone here said, how many LLCs should I open? Okay. That's going to be pretty much the gist of what we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to dovetail it into the feature topic tonight. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go over a topic that I've presented the last time for Joe, one of Joe's groups, which is the most common structures of LLCs that I see. And the first one is the simplest, the One Llc Structure. Now this is basically you form an LLC and you dump all your assets in the business into the single LLC. Every house you purchase, every investment property, every business transaction. What you're doing with that is it's separating you as a person from your business assets and liabilities. Now, the pros and the cons. The pro with this one is it's the easiest of the business structures to register and set up because you're just forming one company and you're using one company to do all your business. The biggest con with that is, I really got to think of a better way to say that. The biggest drawback with it is if you own multiple properties, you are risking all of them if anything goes wrong. For example, slip and fall accident. You have 4 properties in one LLC, lawsuit doesn't go in your favor, insurance doesn't kick in for it, all 4 of those properties are in jeopardy. You as an individual, as long as you maintained it as an actual business, would not be in jeopardy of losing your own house or your own assets, but your business could lose everything it has. Now, this is what that looks like. With the 3, I'm going to use 3 house examples, but there's no limit to how many houses you can have per LLC. So it just looks like that. You, your LLC, and all the properties you own. Are there any questions about this type of a structure? There we go. Had to huff and puff and blow that one down. So multiple LLC structures. Now, so you have the you don't want to worry about that liability issue. So what a multiple LLC structure is, each property or linked group of properties, now what is a linked group? It's whatever you make it to be. I'll give an example in a moment. Would be placed into separate LLCs. So you could do a structure where each LLC owns exactly one property. Or maybe you have a group of properties that have some common geographic interests, some financial interests, something like that. For example, I have one customer that she puts all of her properties within separate jurisdictions or townships or cities within a single LLC that does business only within that municipality. She made a decision to group it that way. I have other customers that they just form one LLC every single time they form a property. Now, the big thing with that is the LLCs have to be kept at arm's length. This is important because you have to treat them as 100% separate businesses from each other. When you start mixing the assets together, if you find yourself in one of those lawsuits we talked about, a trial attorney is going to try to do everything they can to grab the assets of the other LLCs. You start commingling funds, sharing assets, and all that stuff, they're going to try to get the judge to declare the other LLCs to be a sham and merge them together. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, is notorious for allowing this to happen. So be warned, you're in one of the most hostile states. Question?
What about having one LLC perform services for the other LLC?
I'll be getting to that in a moment. Now the biggest pro with this is if something happens to one property, only that one LLC where the property is contained gets affected. But the biggest drawback is you have to have separate bank accounts, legal records, and it can be costly for a small business owner, especially if you're just starting out, and especially if you're trying to leverage the assets of one property to another to purchase other ones. Now what does that look like in practicality? There it is. So you see there's you have separate LLCs, and you have now I just put one house in each LLC, but you get an idea of what the example is. Are there any other questions about this? And I'm going to answer your question next. Any questions about the separated structures? So to answer your question, the holding company concept. The holding company concept is where you add another LLC or even a corporation over the top of the LLCs that own the properties. So what happens is that you own the holding company or the management company or the company doing the services, as you called it, and that company owns the LLCs, which in turn own the properties. So basically, that holding company will not directly own any one property, but it will provide the consolidated services and consolidated bank and tax filings for the other properties. The holding company itself is owned directly by the investors and may also act as a management entity. I have several customers that do that. They form a holding and management company and then invest through that. The biggest pro with that is it adds another layer of protection. You have yet another LLC between you and the property, so it'd be at least two. The biggest drawback is this is one of the most expensive models to follow if you are a small business owner, because again, you just added yet another layer of complexity. So an attorney and accountant is absolutely critical if you're going this route. So you have your holding company, the holding company owns these LLCs, and each LLC owns whatever respective properties you wanted. Did that answer your question?
No, not exactly. Let me ask this question.
Sure.
This is a very real world example. Let's say you have two LLCs, one of which is intended to perform like rehabs and flips, and one of which is intended to hold rental properties.
Okay.
They'll have like different chart of accounts, right?
Okay.
So the ideal thing would be to have the construction company buy and rehabilitate the property and then transfer it, but unfortunately Pennsylvania's thought patterns, at least to my understanding, about transfer taxes, that imposes a cost. Mm-hmm. So the alternative approach, which I'm considering, is buy the property in the holding, not the holding company, but the rental property oriented LLC, and then contract with the construction LLC to perform the rehab, which may conceivably be expensive, right?
Yeah.
If it's a minor thing, it's like replace that door, that's not an issue. But if it's, we're putting a roof on, we're doing concrete, we're doing this, we're doing that, letting an entirely separate LLC do it has some advantages, at least from my point of view. But what's your take on this?
Well, as I said, I'm not an attorney. I can't give any advice on whether to do it. But what I would say to that is, can you do what you're doing? The answer is yes, as long as you're treating them at arm's length. Okay. So if you happen to own that, shall we say, that construction company, and then that other LLC that has the property, yes, you can use the one LLC to contract with the other. Okay. Now, in Pennsylvania, will they likely try to connect the two? Of course they will, because that's what they're going to do. So don't do that without having an attorney write the contract between the LLCs.
Okay, got it.
So in the same case now, if he's doesn't have a construction company and you're giving it out to someone else, then it doesn't make any.
No, then that's a third-party contract. But you have to treat, in his example, you would have to, even though he would own both of the LLCs in question, you still have to treat the LLCs as third parties from each other, right, absent some other arrangement.
Understood.
Perfect. What other questions do you guys have about this?
So, hypothetically, let's say I start as a small business after 3 houses, and I just want to do the one LLC for the 3 or one for each separate one. But then my income gets strong enough where I can do one of these later ones. Is it easy to upgrade from a lower format to a higher one, or is it a mess?
Do you mean that you have one LLC that has multiple properties and you want to split them up?
Yeah, or I have like one LLC for each of my properties, and I just want to upgrade to one of these others later on.
To add a holding company?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can slide that in at over the top. What you would have to do is have an accountant and an attorney draft an agreement where you're transferring your ownership interests in these LLCs as a fair swap. Basically, okay, the contract says I'm transferring these LLCs into the holding company in exchange for being the owner of the holding company. Okay. So yeah, can you do that? Yes. And I've even had customers that have done it the other way, where they've had all the properties in one and they went down. Oh. That's messy, but it's doable. Okay.
So I don't think I'm doing anything that they care about. My interest in anonymity is mostly to slow down predatory attorneys. What are they really after? Do you have any? And I realize you're not an attorney, so just your casual thought pattern. What are they trying to do? The
federal government wants to know who actually is benefiting financially from the LLCs and who's actually calling the shots. That's the purpose of it. Did anyone hear about the Panama Papers scandal? This is the the Corporate Transparency Act is the result of the Panama Papers scandal. This is Congress's response because they got caught with their pants down on it, quite literally. Because a lot of them were involved in it if you read the actual scandal. along with various other countries. But yeah, the Panama Papers leaked, Corporate Transparency Act gets the boost because they've been trying to pass it for a decade. This is how they decided to enforce the rules. So, any other questions on the multi-company structure? So the biggest drawback with this, as you have heard, is it's expensive. You have to set up all these LLCs. You have to maintain them as separate businesses. You have to make sure all the registrations are up to date. You have to do all that. What if there was a way you didn't have to do any of that? What if you could do one and done? The good people in Dover, Delaware, I was waiting for the laugh, didn't come.
I was smiling.
No, because there are a lot of good people.
Came up with an idea that I have heard directly from people involved in writing the law. Now, I will tell you, I've heard a couple different versions of this. One of the versions I heard with the Series LLC was they wanted to create various series of ownership interests similar to series of stock. However, because of the way the law was written, and I've heard the word typographical error used, I can't validate that, although it was from an elected official who was in the room during the debates, and a judge's interpretation, they accidentally basically created an entirely new entity. That entity is the Delaware Series LLC. So what the hell is a Series LLC? It sounds like it doesn't even, to most people, it doesn't even make sense. Now, what a Series LLC basically does is it's a single LLC that is internally divided into separate cells, known as series. What's a cell? I've decided that in order to keep your interest, because my presentations are boring, it was necessary to get all of you inebriated tonight. What is a cell? This is your LLC. This is your LLC on series. See how the wine box is all broken up into different units so that the wine bottles don't touch each other? Series, 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 series. One LLC. Each series is legally separate from each other and can have separate assets, separate liabilities, separate tax structures, and separate ownership interests.
How is that different from the
Question?
separate in business, or you have to be in Delaware, or is that?
I'm getting to that.
How is that different from the holding?
This is a single LLC split into multiple units, but is still treated legally as one LLC, but liability, tax, and asset-wise, it's actually considered multiple LLCs by the state of Delaware. The difference is you only have to register one, and you get them all. You know I'm going to wipe the smile off his face in a minute, right? You know it's coming.
Because my brain's already on.
The master series oversees the entire LLC, while the individual series are the business units themselves. The master LLC, consider that like the entire box, and the individual series being inside the different cells in here, the different, where the wine bottles would have been. Here's the problem. Here goes everyone's smile. Only a few states authorize Series LLCs. In the Mid-Atlantic, the only state that offers them is Delaware, also Washington, D.C., and more recently, my understanding is Virginia. Okay, so why am I talking about this if we're in Pennsylvania? Can you form a Series LLC in Pennsylvania? No. Can you form a Series LLC in Delaware and use it in Pennsylvania? Yes. Yes, sort of. And therein lies the rub. It is currently unclear how a Series LLC would be treated by the courts of a state that does not recognize Series LLCs. Federal courts have very little case law on Series LLC. There has never been a bankruptcy involving a Series LLC. So would the entire LLC be considered bankrupt or just a series? We don't know. It's never happened. Now, a federal court in Louisiana, I recently learned, ruled that a Delaware Series LLC that was doing business in Louisiana, it was said, the federal court ruled that Louisiana law overrode Delaware law since they were voluntarily doing business in that state, and the series would not be recognized.
That's the precedent. If it's not common yet, that would be precedent for another state that could possibly follow.
Well, it's federal precedent now, I mean, for what little I know. But here's the kicker. And I have no way to put this up on the screen. If you form an LLC in another state and you do business, like if you form an LLC in Delaware and you want to do business in Pennsylvania, you have to go through a process called qualification and get a certificate of authority. Pennsylvania calls that foreign registration. Don't be confused, foreign means foreign to Pennsylvania. I guess they think that they're their own country still. I don't know, it's a Commonwealth. But in either case, when you fill out that form, there is now a checkbox that asks, is this a series entity? You can say yes or no. So Pennsylvania acknowledges entities that are created in series in other states. They just don't allow them to be created in this state. So does that mean that you can register a Series LLC created in Delaware or some other state in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
What will happen if that Series LLC winds up in court?
They recognized it.
Do they? It's never happened. We don't know.
Well, that paper.
Whoever gets sued first will be the precedent setter. And to be clear, New Jersey does not recognize them at all, just to make that clear.
So Pennsylvania will.
Pennsylvania will let you mark a box on the form that says that you're a Series LLC or Series entity, because Delaware also allows Series LPs, limited partnerships as well, operates under a similar structure. But again, when you take that, if you're using it in Delaware, the Delaware courts are set up to handle that because that's the law of the state. But will a judge in Pennsylvania acknowledge that and say, oh, well, this is Pennsylvania, we don't have a corresponding law, or will they say, or will they apply Delaware law to the circumstance? The answer is we just don't know, unless there has been a court case about this that I'm currently unaware of. But I've done my homework on this, and I can't find anything. But like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if I'm digging in the right places to find it. I'm just looking for anything where it comes up.
I'll check. Is your LLC based on where you live or where your business is operating?
Yes,
It's based on where your business is operating?
it's both.
Oh, okay.
So you can register an LLC in any state of your choosing. But if you're doing business in another state, you have to go through the qualification process. If you're a Pennsylvania resident, you can form a business in Delaware, but to do business in Pennsylvania, you have to register here too. And then you're registered in 2 states.
So I live in Delaware. But,
Okay.
And if I wanted to buy properties in Pennsylvania, investment properties, I would have to do the Delaware LLC?
No, you could do a Pennsylvania one if you want. You would just have to have a registered agent in Pennsylvania. Now in Delaware, because because you live in the state, you can be your own registered agent, but I'm not going to get too detailed about that tonight. The Delaware conversation gets a little different when I'm talking about Delaware residents. But sure.
So if I live here in PA and I want to purchase investment properties in Maryland, then
You would have to follow Maryland registrations.
and I would have to set up an LLC in Maryland.
Or set up an LLC in another state and register it as an out-of-state business in Maryland. Now, here's the thing about that too, because there's a kicker. I should have done a slide for this specifically. When you're talking about registering a business in another state, there are 50 different sets of laws for what constitutes doing business in a state. In some states, the fact that you simply own a property and you're a non-resident does not in and of itself mean you're doing business in that state. But if you're earning money or have a physical presence there, you pretty much are not getting around that. Pennsylvania does mention property as one of its 11 exemptions on its website, but I have no interpretation of what that actually would mean in practice. It just says to hold without more property. In other words, saying if you're an out-of-state company, do you need to register in PA? So I will let the real estate attorneys argue what that means for your particular situation. If you've got an income earning property, it could come down to whether or not it's passive or active income. If you're doing flips and all that, you're physically in the state. If you're just holding it and making passive income, the answer is You have to talk to your attorney. If you live in Pennsylvania, though, good luck getting around it. There are two types of series. The unregistered series is called protected series, and the only notice that they exist is in the operating agreement of the LLC. And each series will have its own operating agreement in addition to the master operating agreement. The registered series produces a paper. You actually file it with the state. There is a cost to do it, and it does increase your annual fee to Delaware for each registered series you add to the business. But the difference is you can walk in to anywhere where you need to sign a contract and show, yes, this is a Series LLC. Here's my registration from the state that's stamped and numbered that this series is recognized by the state of Delaware as an official registration. Will that help you outside of Delaware? The truth is, it's really going to depend on whoever you're dealing with. Are there questions about the two different types of series? I know I hit that pretty quick. I'll take that as a no. So before I open up the forum for general questions, I'm going to answer probably what are the 5 questions that I always get asked when I say, are there any more questions? Should I incorporate? I don't know. I'm not an attorney and I can't give you legal advice. The decision should be made with the consultation of an attorney and an accountant. If you've gone through the process, you understand what I'm talking about and why. My role is as a service provider, and I will incorporate you to your specifications once you make the final decision. That is my job. Does each LLC need to have its own bank account? Here's a short answer for you. Yes. Separating the assets of the LLC is yet another step to demonstrate that these LLCs are operating independently of each other. Now, this is also true if we're applying each series as well. So unless your attorney or accountant instructs you otherwise, it is basically a sound business practice to keep the bank accounts separate and to have each one have its own tax ID, unless your attorney or accountant or the IRS instructs otherwise. Do I need an operating agreement for my LLC? Operating agreement's like the governing document, similar to corporate bylaws, if you've heard of that. So basically it spells out who, what, when, where, why, and how of your business. It's the rules of engagement for your business. Yet another document showing, okay, I have this LLC, this is what it does, and this is how it operates. Now, it's important to understand that that is a private document. It's not going to be filed with any government agency. So you can modify it as you see fit to adapt, as long as it's legal for what you're adding in there. So basically it's going to spell out the business purpose, the role of key employees like the president and all that stuff. It'll identify the partners. Joe?
Make sure you sign your operating agreement. You know how many times I get a copy of an operating agreement that's not signed? Bob sends you a boilerplate. That means it's not signed. You actually have to fill it in and sign it before you send it to your banker.
And I actually have a different format that we're rolling out now that's going to be a lot easier for people to catch that. So that's something we just upgraded it in the past month. Now I want to put a note in there, if we're talking about a corporation, as I said, you would be using a bylaws or shareholders agreement. If we're talking about a partnership or a limited partnership, you would have a partnership agreement. But all of these documents have a similar function. But there are legal distinctions between the different entities and what they're called, but the idea remains the same. You should have something in writing that spells out the rules of engagement between you and your own business and how it operates and what your role is, if any. Should I incorporate in the same state where I do business, to go back to your question? Again, I'm not an attorney. I can't tell you if you should do that or not. But here's what I will tell you. Regardless of the state you choose, you must still be properly registered and licensed in any state, and I'm going to expand that to say any county, any city, any jurisdiction in which you are doing business, because it doesn't just end with registering your company. You still have to get it. Like, for example, in Philadelphia, you have to have a business license, just as one example. So make sure that wherever you're doing business, you have all your proper registrations. That is important, unless there are exceptions to that. Now, in the case of Delaware, specifically, if you register a company in Delaware and you're not doing business in Delaware, you do not have to get a business license from the state. You're just registered there. You have to maintain a registered agent. Then you go and register in whatever state you're actually conducting business in and follow those procedures. But your company is still registered under Delaware law, your operating agreement and all that falls under Delaware. I'm using Delaware, you can substitute any state for that. And then here we go. Why do people incorporate in Delaware? Probably the biggest question I get asked. So basically, it's just a very friendly state to do business in. And it is not for tax reasons. Do not get confused. A lot of people say there's no taxes there. Trust me, I will tell you that on April 30th of every year, I will tell you there are taxes in Delaware. It has a well-established business and contract law, and it has the Court of Chancery. Does anyone even know what that is? Never heard of it, have you? It's a very old court, left over. It's the only state that still has a chancery court. It's an equity court. It has exclusive jurisdiction over all business and contract matters and real estate matters, from what I understand, in Delaware. Appeals directly to the Supreme Court of the state. It is very well established with very predictable results. It's not cheap to argue a case in the Chancery Court, but a lot of them wind up in arbitration. And just to give you some statistics about Delaware, this is the most recent data I was able to get from the state's website. This is published by the Secretary of State, who registers the companies. 67.6% of the Fortune 500 companies are registered in Delaware as of 2020. 1.6 million registered entities of all types. To be clear, there are not 1 million people that live in Delaware, so there's more than one company for every person that actually lives in the state. By the way, 1.6 million, that's roughly the population of Philadelphia. So if you took all the companies in Delaware and removed all the people from Philadelphia, you'd have an equal population. 249,427 new companies were formed during the pandemic in Delaware. Think about that for a minute. Pennsylvania closed the Corporation Bureau. You could not register a company in Pennsylvania for 4 months last year. Delaware never slowed down. 180,000 plus were LLCs, over 51,000 were corporations. 93% of all IPOs were Delaware companies last year. Getting the idea here? It's a very popular state. So there's some statistics for you, and that's my source, corp.delaware.gov/stats, if you want to read, if you want to geek out and read the rest of them. But that's Delaware. Very popular for raising capital, very popular for IPOs, very popular because of the Court of Chancery, which is where a lot of business agreements wind up getting argued. Even federal courts have been known to reference Delaware corporate law. Are there any questions about that? I believe that's the last of my FAQs. Oh no, I have one more. Does each entity have to have a separate insurance policy? Anyone want to take a guess?
Say yes.
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 Maybe. You have to talk to your insurance agent. No, wait. Here's why. Here's the factors why. And by the way, I got this information from a licensed insurance agent who's licensed in Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. Are all the subsidiary entities, like child LLCs, like remember the structure we had, the multi-structure, are they owned by the parent LLC? And if not, exclusively by the parent LLC. If not, what's the percentage? Percentage matters. What type of properties are owned? Where are the properties located? What is the purpose of each property? Boom. So the question is, could you have one policy that covers all your LLCs? The answer is yes. However, it depends on how you structure the entity. So talk to your insurance agent. Don't skimp out, because that might be the one thing that saves you if you have one of those accidents. And then there's another question, how long does it take to incorporate? Delaware takes a few days to currently they are at 12 weeks, by the way. However, if you talk to me, I can get it down to 24 to 48 hours. New Jersey is the next day by 10 a.m., next business day, standard. Pennsylvania is currently at 12 to 14 business days as of October 18th. Pennsylvania was at 4 months. And that number finally came down to about 3 weeks just in the past couple weeks. And one word of caution. As I said, a lawyer and accountant should be used in any multi-entity structure, and that includes Series LLCs, to make sure the records are kept correctly. Do not take a shortcut on this, because if you do, you blow a hole through what is called the corporate veil, and you can have your personal assets attacked if you don't do it. And always make sure you have proper insurance for both your business and yourself. I'll let your insurance agent determine what that means. So at this point now, I will open for general questions for anything I did not cover.
So, all right, let's imagine that somewhere a Series LLC is. Am I correct that I understand that, let's say you have the main LLC, that's not even named.
Okay.
And you have two Series LLCs, A and B.
So 2 series within that LLC?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a main LLC with an A and a B.
Okay.
Whatever, sub LLC, I don't know what the
Series LLCs.
Series LLC. Can the series, can the A Series LLC have different members than the B Series?
Yes. The short answer is yes.
That's what I was reading.
Follow up to that, how about the tax implications for that?
Beg your pardon?
Tax implications. They have to each have their own.
They would have their own tax ID number. They would be treated as separate entities for that purpose.
You'd have individual K1s or whatever.
Correct, for each one. And it would say something like ABC LLC Series A. Now you can name the series whatever you want, but it would actually indicate both the name of the LLC and the series on such documents. And that's true for every document.
That's required because that's one of the issues with Wyoming is that once someone becomes aware of a Series LLC, they're aware, like if they see Series LLC C, they have pretty good indication that there's a Series LLC B and A.
Of course.
But is that's valid? That not
Yeah.
valid? That applies in Delaware and elsewhere?
Yeah, you want to make sure that people, in fact, I've seen contracts with Series LLCs. Now, I can't speak for what attorneys wrote them, but I actually saw one that basically said such and such series only in a contract to emphasize that you're only dealing with that series of that LLC. Again, lawyer. What other?
So in terms of
I'll get to you next. Go ahead.
in terms of cost then, right, compared to having the holding company and separate LLCs?
It is, the cost difference comes down to you would have a single LLC. In Delaware, the procedure is exactly the same to form an LLC or a Series LLC. The difference is a Series LLC, you have to write a special charter to enable that. Now, I'm not an attorney, I can't write that charter, and it could vary based on your circumstances. So you want to have a Delaware attorney familiar with LLCs write that charter. I file them for attorneys who write them all the time. Now, as far as the cost goes, if you're using the protected series, which is the unregistered ones, then no, there's no additional cost. If you use the registered series, you're adding $90 for each registration and then $75 to the annual fee of $300. So if you have one series, you're going to have $375. You have 2 registered series, it'll go up to $450. I was only an engineer, I should be able to do this in my head, but you get the idea.
So yeah, so okay. So so the only difference between that and a Series LLC then is your initial cost to incorporate, and then your yearly.
Correct. If you use the registered series. Now remember, I'm only speaking to Delaware in this regard. Other states may have different ways that they handle it. I know Illinois has registered series. Some states don't. I really can't get into too many of those details because this is kind of alien territory, largely because they've only recently become popular. And they've become popular both in real estate transactions as well as in financial and securities. In fact, that case I was talking about in Louisiana involved private equity, and people were doing investment into the series. So, but they were operating from New Orleans with a Delaware Series LLC, and that's where the problem came in. So, any other questions about this, or oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the house next to me was sold to an LLC.
Mm-hmm.
How do I go about finding out who the true owners of that LLC are?
You would have to find out what state the LLC was registered in, and then if that state has public disclosure, like Wyoming has public disclosure, Nevada has public disclosure, Delaware does not. Delaware will not tell you who owns an LLC. Some states will. Pennsylvania does not, unless you pull up the paperwork and see whose name's actually listed as the original organizers. But like, for example, if I form a company in Delaware, my name goes down as the original creator of the LLC. Once I'm done, I sign over control to my customers. That information remains privileged. Wyoming does require some level of public declarations, as does Nevada. Those are, by the way, if you haven't figured out, Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming, in that order are the 3 most popular states to form LLCs. But yeah, you would have to figure out what state it's in first. Going to go around. Last call for questions. Sorry, last call for alcohol is already gone. It's empty.
If you have an LLC, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
And you have 2 different types of businesses and they're under the one LLC, is that wrong?
Can you do that legally? Yes.
With a different
Should you is a whole other angle. You're risking one business. If anything goes wrong with the one business, then it takes the whole LLC down. So it's the liability is consolidated, unless we're talking about a Series LLC.
For example, licensed realtors think they should use the LLC they collect their commissions on to buy real estate. One should not touch the other. One's for sales commissions, the other is for acquisition. 2 different type of transactions.
So you need a separate LLC?
I would have a separate LLC. If I was a licensed realtor and want to buy real estate, sounds great, but it could create another LLC for it. Do not use the one you're collecting your commissions on.
So that number on the screen is my office line. You text that, it goes into the abyss. Just please note, I can't take orders by text. We have to actually do it by phone or by email. My email's on there, bob@chesspin, CHESSPIN.com. If you want me to check any LLCs that you previously had in Pennsylvania to find out if they are still active, I will not charge you to check it. If you need to if you need me to check the addresses, any of that, I don't charge to check. If you want me to do any changes or set up new LLCs, yes, I charge for that. I'll go over the fees with you privately rather than spelling them out here, because every circumstance is different. I custom quote everybody. That's all I got.
Guys?
Thank you.
How'd Bob do?
Awesome. Very good.
So,
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Garrett Rhodes from the Lehigh Valley Real Estate Investors Club, and I'm down here in Philadelphia, right next to the airport, for the Real Estate Niches meeting that just got finished. We had an awesome speaker in the form of Bob Chesick talking about Series LLCs, a lot of new information that we investors need to know about based on new legislation that just came out of Washington this year. So I just want to thank Joe Scarice, who puts on these events. It's always a fantastic meeting. You missed something really good tonight, and hopefully we'll see you again next month in November. Again, Garrett Rhodes from Mid-Atlantic Wholesale Properties. Loving this meeting, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.